Alright, so the Google Pixel 6a. It's been out for a couple weeks and there was so much excitement around this phone. And I want to talk about my experience after using this for the past couple weeks and why I honestly think that the Pixel 6a is the best new phone you can buy for less than $500. Bold claim. I know, that's a bold claim. There's so many phones out there for less than $500, but I think that a lot of reviews about this phone so far have looked really closely at the spec sheets. And so in this video, I want to kind of get away from the spec sheets and talk more about my experience, because in my opinion, the spec sheets can be misleading here. On paper, it looks like it might be an inferior phone to the Galaxy A53 or some of the Poco phones or a lot of other phones out there that offer a lot of big specs, big numbers on paper. But when it comes down to the actual experience, after actually using this phone, the experience on this phone, I think, is hands down better. And I think it becomes really clear after you use this phone for a while that Google really had the experience in mind when they made it. Obviously, they're a software company as well as kind of a hardware company now. And so the combination of compromises and emphasis that they put on this phone, in my opinion, gives us the best mid-range phone on the market right now. So in this video, we'll talk a lot about my experience, but let's start off with the cameras. This is probably the most exciting thing, in my opinion, about this new phone, and one of the main reasons that the Pixel 6a is so much more exciting than the previous A series phones, which were already, pretty decent. But the main reason here is because they now have the Tensor chip on them. The same chip that we're seeing on the Pixel 6 and the Pixel 6 Pro, a flagship caliber chip that's giving us the same image processing that we're seeing on the flagship phones. And on top of that, even though the sensor is a little bit older on here, it's the same sensor we've been seeing on a lot of Pixel phones in the past, which means Google has a lot of experience with that. And it definitely shows with this phone. Not only are you getting incredible photos, as you would expect, but you're also getting really substantially better videos than I ever expected out of this sensor. And I think that adding this chip in here was really the best thing Google could have done because it really puts it ahead of almost any other mid-range out there. One of the main reasons that this is better than the Galaxy A53, if you've seen my video on that, is because it has a faster chip on the inside. And really the only other mid-range phone that does this is the iPhone SE. And the iPhone SE, one of the main reasons people recommend that is because it has that bionic chip on there from Apple, has their flagship chip in there. And so now that Google's doing the same thing, it's really hard to knock this phone down. When you look at the video, it's massively improved over the previous iterations, as you can see right here. And in broad daylight, as you might have seen in my comparison between this and the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, the photos are really indistinguishable from flagships. And I think that in a blind camera test, this would have a strong chance of beating any flagship out there on the market right now, given a normal daylight scene. Now, even in dim lighting, the astrophotography and the night modes are pretty amazing. But if you start to get into low light video, you can tell that the sensor is a little bit of a limitation there. And as far as video quality goes, I've been talking a lot about the main sensor on the back, but there are some limitations here. And the limitations Google made here are related to the ultra-wide lens and, of course, the front-facing camera, which are both limited to 1080p. And the front-facing camera, in my opinion, is kind of subpar. If you do any kind of vlogging, this is not going to really have a great performance. You're not getting the best dynamic range, and you're also getting, like I said, a limit in quality as well.
1080p.
But moving on to the design of this phone, there's a couple things I noticed after using this for the past couple of weeks, but starting off with the plastic back. Honestly, of all the plastic backs I've ever used, this one is by far my favorite. It just feels like glass, it's very convincing. Some people complain that it's a little bit slippery, but because this is a smaller phone, I love how thin this phone is, how small it is. I'm always a big fan of smaller phones, especially when they have flagship processors in them. But with this smaller phone, you're able to easily put a case on this, and when you put a case on it, it's still a very pocketable and very palm-friendly phone that you can easily reach across the whole phone, and you don't have to feel like you have a massive TV in your pocket. Now, this is also IP67 water and dust resistant, which is becoming more and more of a standard, but still, it wasn't really long ago that we didn't see any IP rating on mid-range phones. So having that resistance on here, I think, is a huge positive. But the glass is a little bit more fragile compared to the flagships, at least. So like I said, I recommend having a case on here. It's not sponsored, but I have a Spigen case that I've been using. It has a nice little stand on the back. And again, great pocketability. It kind of fixes the grip thing. Like some people complained it was slippery. And I even mentioned in my comparison video between this and the Pixel 6 Pro that not having a big lip on the back, and to be clear, I'm definitely not complaining about the lack of a camera bump. I love how slim this is, but I did find on the Pixel 6 Pro, it's a slippery back as well, and I used that ledge kind of to hold the phone in my hand. So if you have smaller hands, this is a little slippery, and again, a case really fixes that perfectly. Additionally, you're not getting a 3.5mm jack. This is the one topic that I'll admit I'm a little bit out of touch with because I review a lot of earbuds, so I have a lot of earbuds, so I don't use a 3.5mm jack. But I know, for example, like my dad, 100% for a fact, uses his headphone jack all the time. I never really do, but a lot of people buying mid-range phones probably are looking for this because it's a good value and they don't want to spend an extra $100 or $200 on a pair of wireless earbuds. Now, with that said, there's plenty of wireless earbuds that are $20 or $30. I have videos about that if you want to see them, but the lack of a headphone jack has to be some kind of drawback that you need to recognize here. Now, speaking of wireless earbuds, Google has been really building out their ecosystem with the addition of the Pixel Watch. Now, as soon as that comes out, I will be reviewing that. You're not going to want to miss that. I'm so excited about that video. So be sure to go down, click that subscribe button. It's going to be like, I just can't wait to test out the Pixel Watch and see how it really works with a phone like this. And then we get to the display. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of people were just looking at the spec sheets for, and they were looking for any kind of drawback they could find. So maybe this is a hot take, but when did 60 hertz become a negative, like a drawback for a mid-range phone? Like, this is $450, 60 hertz makes perfect sense. The iPhone 13 and the 13 mini have 60 hertz, and the iPhone SE has 60 hertz. Like, a lot of phones out there are not 120 hertz yet. And so anybody buying this phone almost undoubtedly is coming from another 60 hertz display. And so I think this display is more than passable. I don't think it's any kind of drawback for me. It doesn't feel slow. It doesn't feel like, I really haven't had any complaints with this. And so I would say this, do not buy this phone just because of the 60 hertz display, because honestly, I don't think many people are going to find that as a valid deal breaker. Now, the color on here is passable, but definitely not nearly as good as a Pixel 6 Pro if we're really nitpicking at the display. But like I said, you're getting a solid display, but I will say that the Pixel hardware consistency off the line has not really been perfect. So while my unit is doing just fine, I'm confident that there are some out there that might have rainbowing or a little bit more shadowing, like maybe some inconsistent displays. And so if that's the case for you, leave a comment below. I want to know what other complaints you have if you've been using the Pixel 6a. Additionally, the biggest complaint on here, really the only actual complaint I have besides the selfie camera, is the fingerprint sensor. It's definitely really slow. I highly recommend registering your fingerprints twice. That'll help a little bit. Maybe go into just use a pin instead. As far as the battery goes on here, from my experience, I'm getting a reasonable amount of battery out of this. The display's not really drawing as much power, so that helps. And in standby, like whenever you're not looking at the phone, Pixel does a fantastic job of preserving the battery. But because it lacks wireless charging, I can't just top it off whenever I'm sitting at my desk or in my car. So I find that I am always kind of looking for a charging cable, and so I'll charge it overnight, and I can usually get through a full day without a problem. But another thing to note is if you're trying to do a little quick charge, like in the middle of the day, you want to juice it up a little, it can get warm while it's charging. Not hot, but if you're using it while it's charging, you'll notice it gets a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit warm. Moving on to the user interface. We all know that Pixel is known for being a clean, simple interface. For me personally, it's one of my favorite operating systems out there. And honestly, it just feels clean. There's no bloatware on there. You can choose how integrated you are with Google's AI. So if you want to go all in and have voice recognition and the assistant baked into everything, and you have like live translations and things like that, then you can do that. But if you want to have a little bit less of that and you say, all right, like I don't want to feel like I'm being spied on all the time, even if maybe you still are, you can turn off a lot of that stuff. So you have some options on how integrated you really want to be. Additionally, it's not nearly as buggy as we saw with the original Pixel 6 and the Pixel 6 Pro launch. So Google clearly has had plenty of time to kind of work out the bugs with this new Tensor chip and their operating system. And this really reflects it. It's been very smooth from my experience. And if you get it, there's a couple things I recommend enabling, some really cool features like quick tap for one to open, say, Snapchat or Spotify or whatever you want. Also, now playing, I think is really useful. If there's a song stuck in my head, I can usually look at my phone and see what song recently played. If I was in a grocery store or something, I can figure out what that is. I can play the song and get it out of my head finally. And then, of course, call screening has always been one of my favorite features on a Pixel phone. If you get scam calls, you can just screen them automatically. And if it's a legitimate person, if it's your doctor from an unknown number or your brother calling from a payphone in Las Vegas, you can answer it and you don't accidentally reject people just because you don't recognize the number. So in conclusion, my experience with this phone tells me that $449 is a really compelling price. If you see any sales, definitely jump on that, and I'll have a link in the description to the latest price, but there's really a big focus here on the experience. I would say this is hands down going to be my recommendation for any casual phone buyers who are on somewhat of a budget, but even if you're not, if you're just looking for a new phone and you don't specify what your budget is, you might say you could save a lot of money and get the Pixel 6a. You're gonna get a lot of flagship style experiences while missing out on things like a telephoto lens, a 4K selfie lens, and wireless charging, among a couple others. But for the most part, the experience with this phone should be really solid. I think as far as mid-range phones go, this one is by far the best on the market, in my opinion. But leave a comment and let me know what you think about this